Chapter 2. Razelle sighed heavily and locked the door to the cafe after the last customer left for the day. Her thoughts still lingered on the handsome man who came into the coffee shop today, Luke Stevenson. He was quiet, brooding, and far too handsome for his own good, especially wearing that Stetson on his head. She had always secretly loved that rugged cowboy look on a man. Maybe it was because it reminded her of living in the country and having a permanent place to call home. Having a home and the love and belonging that went with it was something she'd always dreamed of, even as a little girl. Seeing Luke this morning reminded her of those dreams. It was something she didn't believe she'd ever have. Her mother's rules made that impossible. Sighing heavily, Razelle walked to the kitchen to grab her cleaning supplies. The other two baristas had already left for the day, and it was time to get the rest of her chores done. Mother didn't like to pay workers overtime, so every day it was up to her to clean the dining area and kitchen in their coffee shop. Razelle, you'll need to help Miguel clean up the food and wipe down the kitchen, clean the counter, tabletops, and mop the floors. Mother stood behind the countertop by the cash register. The shattering sound of the till tape being printed filled the room. As usual, Mother was busy balancing the books and counting the money made that day. Of course, Mother. Razelle knew her job and felt like she didn't need to be reminded every night. But her mother demanded that all the details of her world be controlled, which meant that her daughter had to meet Mother's exacting standards or there would be trouble. Razelle hurried to the kitchen to help Miguel clean up. Missy Roz, I've already packaged the extra food for today, and I'll wipe the kitchen countertops. You go ahead and clean the dining area. Miguel was their short-order cook who worked during the weekdays. He had always been very helpful. Miguel, you're so nice to me. Thank you. Razelle bent down under the sink and grabbed the disinfectant spray and the stack of wipes. You're easy to be nice to, Missy. Miguel grinned and whispered, Also, don't forget the blue container in the fridge. You take it with you tonight. Thanks so much for doing that, Miguel. It means a lot. A tear escaped out of one eye as Razelle looked into his brown eyes filled with kindness. Miguel was aware that in the past year she went once a week to the camp that was located across the creek and down in the valley. She brought food and herbal remedies to help those who were hungry and sick. Miguel had kept her secret ever since he found food missing from his kitchen. Her mother didn't know. It had to stay that way. Helping people at the camp was important to Razelle. She wanted to do something for them. When her friend Cassie had asked her to come with her to the camp one night a year ago, she had gone, and she'd been shocked at the lack of food and by how many people were sick. She'd decided then and there that she would go every week and bring what supplies she could to help. Of course I help you, Missy. And make sure you get some sleep tonight, Miguel whispered. I will, I promise. Razelle smiled at him and carried the cleaning supplies to the cafe area. She worked quickly and got all her work done in record time. Her mother looked over her work as usual and nodded. My head is bothering me tonight, Mother said as they climbed the stairs to their apartment above Angelique's cafe. She was thankful they didn't have to walk very far to get home. When her mother had bought this place 3 years ago, it had seemed like the perfect place. Finally, they wouldn't be moving from place to place almost every year like they had done all her life. But her mother continued to have headaches. She always had tension headaches as far back as Razelle could remember. When she turned 8, Roz started to learn how to massage her mother's head and back to take away the pain. If you lie down on your bed, Mother, I'll get the cream and be back soon. It was her duty to help her mom feel better. She handed her mother some pain medicine, and after she swallowed it back, Razelle began massaging her mother's head in gentle circles to soothe the pain. She hoped it wouldn't take too long for her mother to fall asleep. There was still so much to get ready for tonight. After only 15 minutes, the sound of her mother's steady snores echoed across the room. Razelle breathed a sigh of relief. Tiptoeing out of the bedroom, Roz went to the kitchen to find food. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast and her stomach was protesting. Her white fluffball cat, Sunbeam, was meowing, asking for cat food. Roz quickly opened a can and placed it in her bowl. She ate a sandwich and ran her fingers through her cat's thick white fur. Her purring sounds helped Roz relax. After Razelle was finished, she hurried to her bedroom. Closing the door behind her, she changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a t-shirt. She filled her backpack with dried herbs that she'd grown herself. The herbs had proven useful for the natural healing of fevers and other sickness. She went to the kitchen in the coffee shop to grab the container filled with food. Hurrying back upstairs, she shoved everything she needed for tonight inside her backpack. After slipping on her hoodie and running shoes, she quietly opened her window and climbed out. Careful to close the window, she climbed down the roof until she reached the tall, sturdy poplar tree that stood outside her window. Scurrying down the tree, she was soon on the ground. She hurried along the trail toward the river. It was dark outside except for the street lights from their small town. She took out her flashlight to help guide her way. Crossing the river in her small rowboat, soon she made it to the other side and hurried toward the camp. With silent steps, Razelle made her way toward the ramshackle cabin where they kept a few medical supplies. Her best friend, Cassie, said she'd meet her there. Her friend had a big heart for others. After Cassie had discovered a few teenagers from the camp a little over a year ago, she'd made it her mission to help them and had talked Razelle into going with her. Roz quietly opened the door to the cabin and was greeted with a hug. Addie clung to her longer than usual, and when Roz stepped back, the teenager's eyes were filled with worry. "I'm so glad you're here, Razelle." "Of course I'm here, Addie. I said I'd come." Roz looked over at Addie and then to Cassie, and fear rose in her belly at the anxiousness in her friend's eyes. "Tell me, what's happened?" "The man that Ryan brought here yesterday, he's sick. He's got a fever. I'm not sure what's wrong with him." Cassie pointed to the cot at the far end of the cabin where the man lay tossing and turning in a feverish sleep. Roz walked over to him and set her backpack on the floor before she touched his forehead. He was burning hot. "Cassie, we need to bring down his temperature. I'm going to do my best to cool his body. If you could boil water to make herbal tea, that would be helpful." Razelle whispered, taking charge with what she could do to help. Cassie started the camping stove that sat on the small table near the door. She filled the kettle from the large 5-gallon pails they kept filled in the cabin. The stove was powered by gasoline, so it didn't need electricity or propane to run. It was one of the few items that Sloane, the leader of the camp, had allowed them to have in this cabin. Soon the water boiled, and Razelle pulled the small bag of feverfew herbs out of her backpack. After she'd made a cup of herb tea, she allowed time for the steaming cup to cool before she spoon-fed it to the man. The sick man moaned as Roz lifted his head to drink. He sipped only a little tea, but she hoped it would be enough to help lower his fever. Cassie, Addie, and Razelle continued to watch over him for the rest of the night, until they could see the red glow of dawn in the sky. "Well, I need to get going now. I can't be late getting home, or Mother will find out that I've gone." Razelle left behind the food and herbs, but grabbed the containers and put them in her backpack. She didn't want Mother to find out her containers were missing. "I know you need to leave, but it would be so helpful if you could stay. That man's fever isn't low enough yet." Cassie and Addie walked with her outside the cabin and down toward the creek. Razelle sighed. "You know I wish I could stay. Addie, you can help Cassie take care of that sick man today, all right?" "Yes, I can. I know what to do." Addie pushed back her sandy blonde hair and wrapped her arms around her belly. "There, you see? Addie will help. You'll be fine, Cassie." Razelle gave her friends hugs, wishing she wouldn't have to leave for home so soon. Luke. A man's voice growled loudly outside his cabin door, accompanied by several loud knocks. Luke rolled over in his bed and stared at the clock on his nightstand. It was only 4 a.m. Who could be banging on his door at this early hour? "Come on, Luke. Open the door. It's Hudson." Groaning, Luke sat up, rolling his legs over the side of the bed, and rubbed his eyes. The last time his best friend had knocked on his door early in the morning, it was when they were in high school, and Hudson's mom had needed to be rushed to the hospital for heart problems. "Hold on, man." Concerned, Luke hurried to pull on jeans, slipped on a t-shirt, and raced to the door. Throwing open the door, his friend stood there staring at him, silent. Hudson ran a hand through his auburn hair while dark brows puckered together, forming deep worry lines on his forehead. "Come in, Hud. You look terrible." "I'm not surprised. I feel terrible." His friend stumbled through the door, his mind clearly elsewhere. Luke eyed his friend for a moment, noticing the dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. He pulled out a wooden chair from the table and pointed to it. "Sit down for a minute, Hud. Catch your breath. I'm going to make coffee. When you're ready, you can tell me what's got you all in a bother." As his friend sank slowly into the chair, Luke walked to the kitchen counter and began to add the coffee grounds to his new coffee machine. It was the one luxury he'd allowed himself since moving to Grant's cabin. For Luke, proving that it was possible to live below the national average household income and still save and invest his money had been a sacrifice. But he owed it to the people who bought his software and smartphone apps on budgeting and investing to show them that if he could do it, they could too. Which was the reason why he'd moved out here to this 2-room rundown cabin. Almost a year ago, he'd had the idea to move here to live on Grant's 1,000 acres. This was the same land his great-grandfather stipulated in his will that Luke was to inherit if he married by his 27th birthday. That deadline was coming way too fast. Only Grant could get away with such a ridiculous notion. It shouldn't have surprised him that the old coot came up with a plan to control their lives long after he went on to his reward. Luke had no idea where he would find a fake wife by the time his birthday came around. Luke rubbed his eyes and turned to his best friend. With bubbling sounds from the coffee machine percolating in the background, Luke pulled out a chair and turned it around, placing his arms on the backrest. "So, tell me what's up, Hud. The only other time I've seen you this worried was when your mom had that heart attack years ago." Luke leaned his chin on his arms, fixing his eyes on his best friend. "Well, this time it's almost as bad." Hudson lifted his head, placed his elbows on the table. For a moment, a haunted look came over his brown eyes as Hud stared at him in silence. Luke waited. The coffee finished brewing and he went over to pour the hot java into 2 mugs. He handed 1 cup to his friend and took a sip from the other mug. It's Waylon." "Your brother?" At Hudson's nod, Luke pressed for answers. "What happened to him?" "That's just it, Luke. I don't know. He's disappeared." Hud ran one hand through his already unkempt hair. Luke could see his hand shake slightly with the movement. "I called his phone 2 nights ago, and I just figured he was out. But when I called again last night, and I got no answer, I stopped by his apartment. He wasn't home." "Do you have any idea where your brother could have gone to?" Luke asked. Hudson shook his head. "Not really. The few spots that I thought of, I just spent all night checking out those places. He wasn't anywhere to be found." Are there any other favorite hangout spots Waylon told you about?" Hud scratched his forehead, a faraway look in his eyes. "Well, there is one other place. In the past few weeks, Waylon has talked about seeing some places with his friend Ryan. Waylon kept talking about going to the camp by the creek." Luke sucked in a quick breath. "The camp, as in the hangout for drug dealers? You think your brother went there?" Hudson nodded, his forehead puckered in worry. Luke could understand his friend's concern for his brother. That camp was on the other side of Grant's land by a few miles, along the long 4-mile stretch of tree line that bordered the creek. Years ago, when Hudson and Luke were in middle school, they used to spend so much of their time together on the weekends, riding their trail bikes along the banks of the creek. Since Luke had returned from Texas, he learned it had become a haven for drug dealers and other illegal activities. No wonder Hudson was worried. "I think it's likely that my brother went there." Hudson sighed heavily. "And as much as I don't want to, I need to see if Waylon's there. If he is, I need to bring him home before Mom has another heart attack from worry." "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go get your brother and bring him home." Luke set down his coffee mug and stood to his feet. He pulled a hoodie over his head, slipped on his shoes, and opened the door. Hudson got up from the table and followed close behind. "Thanks, man. I owe you one." Luke shrugged. "I'm happy to help, Hudson. Friends look out for each other. He hurried to the shed where he kept 2 ATVs. He always kept 2 of everything he considered useful to his life, in case one of them broke down. This time it would pay off. He tossed a helmet and keys to Hudson. "We can drive up to the tree line, but then we'll need to walk from there. We don't want them to hear us coming." "Yeah, that's a good idea." Hudson put on his helmet and started the engine. Luke started his ATV and drove out of the shed and across Grant's yard. Soon they were following the familiar dirt road. Hudson and Luke had driven their dirt bikes along this trail many times during high school when they went off-roading together. He turned back with a grin at his friend, thinking of all those hot summer days they'd spent riding the backwood trails together. They had forged their own paths through the dense trees that lined the edge of Grant's land. In all of their adventures along the creek, during those middle school years, they knew the area well. When they reached the tree line just beyond Grant's land, Luke stopped the ATV and turned off the engine. Hudson was right behind him. The morning sun was trying to poke its head above the clouds, but so far the outside world around them was muted in shades of light gray with speckles of red from the rising sun. "We'll need to be as quiet as we can, Hud. We don't want to alert whoever is guarding the place," Luke whispered, and a grimace formed on his lips as he hung his helmet on the handlebar of the four-wheeler. Hudson chuckled ruefully as he followed. "No, I don't suppose we do. So what's the plan?" Luke started to walk through the thick maze of trees, hearing his friend's footsteps behind him. "The only plan I have is to search through the camp to try to find your brother. We'll start looking along the border and make our way inside." Luke turned to his friend, who nodded. "That sounds good." They walked for a good 30 minutes before they made it to the river. Luke had always kept a canoe here in case he wanted to go across. The 2 of them quickly rowed to the other side. As they arrived at the shoreline, they carried the canoe and hid it in some trees before they began walking. Soon, Luke saw the outline of a few run-down wood cabins and makeshift tents. Clothes hung at awkward angles over ropes that had been tied between trees. Broken bicycles, old tires, and extra household items were haphazardly thrown on the hard dirt between the tents. Everything about this place looked like it was falling apart. Luke shook his head at the sight. "Let's start at the edge of the camp, over that way." He pointed to the western corner. The bubbling sounds of the river could be heard in the background as they made their way nearer the water's edge. Loud snores of people sleeping and the sounds of a few children crying could be heard throughout the camp. As they approached the creek, 2 women and a teenage girl stood, with their heads close together. Luke overheard their whispers. He turned to Hudson, gesturing for silence. The woman with the thick auburn braid that hung below her waist spoke in a hurried whisper. "Cassie, I can't stay. My mother will be very angry if she finds out I'm missing." "I know, and I'm sorry, Razelle. But Rye's friend is sick. He was throwing up most of the last 2 nights. He needs your help, and you're the only one that knows what to do." The raven-haired girl's brows puckered with worry. The teenage girl clung to the woman with the auburn hair. "Addie, you can help Cassie take care of that sick man today, all right?" "Yes, I remember what you've taught me." The teenager pushed back sandy blonde hair away from her face and wrapped her arms around her middle. "There, you see, Cassie? Addie will help. You'll be fine." The woman with the auburn hair started to move away. Luke's ears perked up as he listened. "You'll have to watch over him today. Sloane isn't going to let the new guy leave anyway. He'll be stuck here for a while." To Luke's ears, it sounded as if this guy Sloane was a leader of sorts. "You know Sloane would do anything for you, especially after you saved his life." Cassie's voice turned desperate. "Roz, please stay a little longer." "I can't, Cassie, but I'll be back tomorrow night, all right?" The woman with the long braid stepped away from her friend. The teenager sighed and trembled slightly as the woman turned away. She was intent on walking down the path to the creek when Luke stepped in front of her. A sudden gasp of surprise flew out of her mouth. He froze. Here she was, standing in front of him. This was the woman from the coffee shop, Razelle. Large green eyes widened. He drank in the sight of her. She was beautiful, with auburn hair that framed large green eyes, a delicate upturned nose, and full lips. Dark brown lashes dusted cheeks that flushed rosy against the backdrop of the warm red glow of the sunrise. Just as quickly, the surprised look on her face was replaced by wariness. She tucked her hands deeper into the sleeves of her large hoodie and crossed her arms over her chest. Luke realized he'd better start talking if he wanted to keep her attention. He stepped close enough to see her face, which was shadowed by the hoodie that framed her face. She looked young and much too thin. The woman stood there as if trying to hide in the depths of her oversized clothes. Razelle. Luke hated it that he stuttered. He had seen her yesterday, and something inside of him insisted that he needed to impress her. He could tell that that was a total failure. A memory suddenly came back to him from when he first met her at Gabe and Rory's wedding. Ever since he'd laid eyes on her that first time, he couldn't get Razelle out of his mind. That day was etched forever in his mind. Roz had worn a cream-colored off-the-shoulder dress that highlighted her slender figure. He still remembered her long, beautiful hair that had been loose that day. Thick auburn tresses had descended downward past her waist, rippling like ripened reddish-brown wheat in the sun. She was a vision. Her beauty was only one of the many things that attracted him. She also had a spark for life and a compassion for others that drew him to her. She was captivating. At the flicker of recognition that sparked in her eyes, he sighed in relief. He chided himself for being a little too elated that she remembered him. An unexpected protectiveness welled up inside Luke as he stared at the woman in front of him. She was too kind, too compassionate, and much too vulnerable to be side by side with the seedy people at this camp. Not only that, but if the dark shadows under her eyes and her thin shivering body were any indication, she was exhausted. What was Razelle doing in this awful place in the middle of the night anyway? Luke didn't know if he wanted to shake some sense into her for taking the risk, or if he wanted to just hold her close. If he were honest with himself, he'd choose the latter. Only he wouldn't stop there. He'd likely kiss her senseless. He swallowed and took a small step back. As tempting as she was, at this moment what he needed most were answers. A wave of protectiveness welled up inside of him. "Just what are you doing here, Razelle, in this unsafe place in the middle of the night?"